Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you this podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting their careers, in transition, or possibly feeling stuck. Giving them access to stories from people who have already been where they've been, as to give them maybe some different ideas or different approaches. Today we're going to be talking with Cheryl Campbell, who is an independent director on two boards, one public and one private. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Cheryl was also a former corporate exec at Xcel Energy. So we'll get into that in a minute about all of the things she's done in her career. But as you know, listeners, I always like to start with the icebreakers so that we find out, Cheryl, where you grew up, what your family life was like, how many siblings, where you are in the birth order, and how that influenced you as a person.
Okay, I am one of three, the middle child of three.
Oh, you're a middle. I'm a middle.
Yep, and I am a prototypical middle child, probably, when it comes right down to it. I have an older brother and a younger sister. I was actually born in Southern California. My dad had one of those jobs where we moved around a lot. But I've spent probably the last 45 years here in Colorado. So Colorado is home to me unless you're a native, and then you don't view it that way. But Colorado is very much home to me.
Very cool. So what sports did you play, or did you play musical instruments, or?
Yeah, so here's an instrument you don't hear very often. I played oboe when I was in junior high.
That is a unique instrument.
Right. It's a pretty unique instrument. And I played basketball when I was in high school. Never good enough to actually play beyond that. I did play with a young lady who ended up playing at CU while I was in college up there. So, and she was very good. There's no doubt there was a huge difference between her skill set and the rest of the team.
And the rest of the team.
Right.
And in high school, they have a lot of that, right?
Yes.
So what age were you when you moved to Colorado then?
I was about, it must have been 11 or 12. We moved in the middle. I was in junior high school, so probably, and that's back in the day when you didn't have, kindergarten through 5, and then 6 through 8, and then ninth grade was, ninth grade was not in the high school at that time. It was still junior high.
Middle school or junior high.
Still middle school. Okay. So I think we moved in the middle of my 7th grade year. So I was probably, 11 or 12.
Okay.
And we came up here in December. So I changed schools and neighborhoods and friends and everything in the middle of a school year.
Of a year. That's got to be tough.
Yeah.
And what area of town did you move into?
We lived in Denver, in the probably Monaco and Evans area, South Niagara. We lived in that part of town when we first moved up here. My folks were renting a house at that time because Dad got transferred and you moved, right?
Yeah.
So things happened very quickly. It was the middle of the school year. You're trying to get your feet under you. And the following summer, they bought a house in the Thornton, North Glen area, and they are still in that area. They still live in the Thornton, North Glen area.
So when you mentioned you're a typical middle child,
I am. I'm a consensus builder. You try to keep the peace.
Harmony. Yeah.
It's all about the harmony, right?
What was the age difference between you and your siblings?
My older brother's only a year older than I am, and my younger sister is 3 years younger than I am. So we're
3 kids in about 5 years.
Yeah, we're relatively close in ages. Although the interesting thing about that, and maybe others have noticed this too, is there are many things that my brother and I remember very similarly, and my sister is in a totally different time zone. And she's not that much younger than we are, right? Those are 5 years for 3 kids. It's relatively close. So I've always found that interesting when we start comparing notes about, do you remember when this happened, and how different some of her recollections are from my brother.
Yeah, just based on her age probably.
It depends on what time, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're 8 and she's 5, right, that there's a pretty big difference in perception in the way you view the world.
How you view the world, yeah. Okay, so shifting gears just a smidge here. If you look at a fun meter on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you sit on a fun meter?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I like to have fun, and I'm just going to say the older I've gotten, the more I'm interested in moving up the fun scale. So I'd probably say closer to 4 than any. I'm not a wild and crazy, everything's got to be fun kind of person, but I'm interested in having fun. I think making work fun is a good way to, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, parts of it are incredibly serious, and things I've done in my career have been very serious, trying to improve safety and things of that nature. But you should have fun while you're working, because we spend a third or more
so
of our
much
life,
time,
right?
with all these people.
So I'm a big one on let's have fun.
Okay. So same scale, but different meter, the risk meter. Excuse me. Where are you on taking risks?
Okay, so this one's really interesting, right? Because I think it depends on how you define risk, to be honest. So I'll just give you a quick little story. I know a guy, I used to work with a guy that he thought I scuba dive. He thought I was absolutely bonkers to step off the back of a boat and go underwater in that foreign area and breathe, because the sharks might get you, right? And then you just never knew what was down there.
Mm-hmm.
And to him, that was incredibly risky. And to me, it's not, because, you've checked out your equipment, you have a protocol that you follow, and as long as you do that, it's really an incredibly safe sport. What I thought was risky was what he did when he was young in his career, and he had small children, and he quit a very decent corporate job because he didn't like how confining it was, and went off to start his own company. And so I looked at that as really risky, and he looked at me jumping off the back of a boat as really risky. So to me, it really kind of depends on, how are you going to define risk?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I when it comes to things around safety and stuff like that, I'm not a risk taker at all. But I know there are people that would view some of the things that I've done over my career, and some of the changes I've made, and then scuba diving is very risky.
Yeah. Well, I love that, and I will say a lot of people do come down to that. Well, it's how you define risk. It's also how you define fun, because some people are like, one of my last interviews talked about, it's really about what she likes to enjoy doing, which might be just reading a book. So in her mind, she's a 5 because
she's having fun.
She's having fun. She's enjoying that. So, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be an independent director today. So let's talk about where you are today, a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about how did I get here?
Okay. For corporate boards are required, public corporate boards are required to have independent directors, and under the terms of the SEC rules, and they're independent in that they don't get favor or benefit from the corporation, right? So they are supposed to take into account the needs and the desires of the stockholders, the shareholders, and the other external stakeholders for the company when they are providing guidance and direction for the company.
So that's what independent means, and that's who you're representing are the stakeholders and the external.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the SEC has hey, this is how you define it, and this is how you make sure that your directors are independent. So, for instance, a lot of boards have their CEO sit on the board. That person is not independent, obviously, because their wherewithal, their pay and everything's very dependent upon the company and the things the company does, the direction it takes, things of that nature.
But as an independent director, you're still paid.
We are paid. We don't get paid the way CEOs get paid. But we are very clearly aligned with the shareholders and other external stakeholders.
Okay, well, that's good to understand that difference. Yep. Okay, so you're on 2 boards. Tell us a little bit about the 2 boards and how they're different or maybe similar.
Well, one of them is a public company, and it's PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. The other one is a private equity company called Hoffman Southwest. And I am the only independent director on the board for Hoffman Southwest. The rest of the board members are members of the private equity firm that owns that company.
So therefore they're not independent.
Correct. They have a large financial stake, right, in how that company turns out, right? But they tend to like to have at least one independent director. They don't have to follow all the rules that the SEC lays down for public companies, but they actually do a good job of following a lot of them around the audit and the accounting side of it, which, is a good thing. Right?
It's good practice, whether you're public or not, right?
That's
good
right.
practice.
It's a very good practice. It's, their whole goal is growth and, growing the company, and probably most people understand these private equities. They buy up these companies with a goal to grow them to a certain point, and then they sell them, and that's the goal. So my role there is to help with that, that independent view, and also to help them open some doors to companies where they might be able to sell some services and help them grow. So that's the private equity company. The public company is more around, you provide guidance and direction to their day-to-day operations. You don't run the company. The way to think about it is, be curious and be nosy about things, but
nosy, I like that. Be curious and nosy.
Hands off, right?
Yeah.
Because the leadership team does all the day-to-day management of the company. This one is unique because I think most people know that right now PG&E is in bankruptcy due to some very horrible events. And so we're very focused on working to get them out of bankruptcy and on solid footing so that they can go forward and be a different company and be a going concern again.
Yeah. Well, and so it's not only a public company, but it's a utility.
Yes.
So so many millions of people rely on them. So it's not like bankruptcy or going out of business is an option, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But it has to be run effectively and safely and all of those things, right?
Yeah. Utilities are very unique, unique companies. Mm-hmm. There are many of them that are public. But they are very deeply embedded in their communities that they serve.
Yeah.
And we all rely on them every day, right?
We do.
For lights and hot water and cooking and, all kinds of things. So it's really important that they work closely in their communities, right? And then, yes, safe and reliable is really the bailiwick for utilities.
So, as a young person, like in junior high school, did you, have these aspirations that I want to work for a utility? Because you have other utilities in your career path. So, when you were a young person, what did you want to be when you grew up? I was never one of these people that had a career, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And I've always admired people that knew exactly what they wanted to do. Same here. I didn't know either.
I had no clue, right? I mean, this is back in the day where, you didn't have internet, you couldn't Google things and research. And,
so our world was a little smaller, wasn't it?
The world was a lot smaller.
You look at your parents' friends, teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I'm a first-gen college student. In my family, and so there wasn't anybody in my family that had gone to college, and so there wasn't that experience to sort of lean on, right? Mm-hmm. But my dad was adamant that his kids were going to have the opportunity to go to college. I talked to the high school counselors. They basically said, hey, you're good at math and science, you should think about engineering. Okay. I mean, literally, It was that. So I applied to engineering schools. I got accepted. I decided to go up to Boulder. I was, frankly, one of the kids that had an undefined major on day one. And as we're doing orientation, and the dean's down there in the lecture hall, he says, hey, there's 10 of you that have an undefined major, and you're either going to come down here right now when we get done, and you're going to pick a major, or you're going to do them all before I'll let you graduate. So he scared me, right? I mean, and I was that middle child, right? That's like, okay, I'm going to do what he says. So when we got done, I walked down there, and you're looking at it, and it's like, well, I don't know, but I liked chemistry when I was in high school, so I signed up for chemical engineering. What the heck, right? And I mean, it was that spur of the moment to go down that path. And the good news is I got into it and started taking the classes like, hey, this is kind of fun and interesting. So it worked out, right?
Yeah.
It worked out for me. So no, I'm not one of those people who said, this is the kind of engineer I'm going to be, and someday I'm going to be a corporate executive, and someday I'm going to be on a board of directors. No.
And I'm going to be a leader.
Nope.
And yeah.
I didn't have any of that planned out.
So you weren't like on the student council?
No.
Or any, okay.
I was very shy, very introverted, very quiet in high school.
Good student? Did you?
Yeah.
Good grades?
No, I graduated 19th out of 600 and something, so I was a good student, but just very quiet, very shy.
Didn't have to be the life of the party
in
high school.
I'm a borderline introvert extrovert, so
okay.
I've got those really strong introvert capabilities. Every once in a while, it's like just go hide over here in a shell. But, yeah.
So funny the similarities, because on a lot of the tests I've taken, I'm down the middle.
Yep.
And it didn't occur to me that I'm a middle child and everything kind of
right.
around me is a middle and a harmony. And no, I don't want to pick one way or the other. And yeah,
it's
so
funny.
So many similarities.
Yeah.
Okay, so
funny.
you get out of college, then you graduate then with a chemical engineering degree.
Well, I've got a chemical engineering degree and a business undergrad, both of them. I graduated with a dual major.
What drew you to business?
I got partway through the engineering, and it's like, wow, how do you apply this, right? And how do these things fit together? And at the time, the engineering college and the business school worked together to it was a little known program to give you that dual major. So I went down that path, thinking that it would make me more employable. I came from a very modest background. My parents didn't have a lot of money. Their families didn't have a lot of money. So, in my mind, probably I'm thinking, all right, what's going to help me get a job? Right?
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd be more employable if I had both degrees.
Did anyone coach you on that?
Nope.
I mean, I'm thinking that's a pretty big aha for a young person is to go, maybe having a business, some more business information would help me. Wow.
No, I was working at Target when I was in high school and college, and so you start to see some of the although I was sales floor help. So it's not like you're. But I was friends with, when I was in college up at the Target in Boulder, I was friends with the person who ran HR and the store manager. So, I did get a chance to see a little bit more about what went on behind the scenes and talk to them a little bit about how the store operated and stuff. And so that sort of piqued my interest.
This business thing, let me find out more about it.
Yeah, let me find out more.
Cool. Okay, so what were those first couple jobs at a college then? And how did you get them? Were they just people you knew, or did you get recruited?
No, so when I graduated from college, we were actually in a slump, right? So chemical engineers tended to go to the energy industry, the chemical industry, right? And I actually knew I wasn't going to be a steel-toed engineer. I wasn't a steel-toed boot engineer. I wasn't really interested in that. But when I graduated, we were in a slump. And so there were 54 kids with chemi degrees, and 4 of them had jobs, and I was not one of the 4.
Oh, no. Do you mind sharing what decade that is, just to give people a reference?
It was the 80s.
The 80s,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
well, and I'm guessing, too, a woman
80s.
as a chemical engineer.
There weren't many of us.
Yeah.
There were not many of us in the class, but still only 4 had jobs out of 54, right? So I was still working at Target, so I ended up moving back home, which, I wasn't happy about. My parents weren't happy about, that none of us were very happy. But I mean, we made it work. And I kept working at Target. And I kept working with the recruiting center up in Boulder, right, to interview and to learn more about interviewing techniques, and they would let you come in and sign up for interviews when people were on campus. And I interviewed with a company called Colorado Interstate Gas, which is down in Colorado Springs. And I didn't know anything about pipelines and stuff like that, but I thought, well, all right, it at least looks like something that my engineering degree will apply to, right? And I'd interviewed with a couple of other energy companies by then. I'd gone to Dallas on an interview trip. I'd been up in Idaho at one of the Westinghouse nuclear facilities on an interview trip. None of that stuff worked out. And, you're starting to get kind of bummed, right? Because now I graduated in May, and now it's fall and into the winter.
And you've had interviews, it sounds.
Yeah, I'd had
even
interviews.
out-of-state interviews. I mean,
Right.
they pay for you to go, right?
Right.
And so you
Right.
got to think.
But I
they're
just
serious.
never kind of came together, and I was never their top candidate. And I started to look at more, all right, what am I going to do, right? And Target said, hey, come and be a manager. And I kept thinking, they were a great college job, but, retail is just like, all right, I'm going to do it if I can't find anything better, right? That's aligned with my degree, but it wasn't really what I wanted to. And, they were offering training and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, these guys, Colorado Interstate Gas, finally called and made me an offer. And
woohoo, right?
Woohoo is exactly right. And, I broke all the rules. I didn't negotiate. I didn't do anything. I was just like, I'll take it.
Yeah, you're just like, yes, you had me at hello.
Right? So, and in a very short period of time, a matter of a few weeks, I quit my job at Target. I found an apartment in Colorado Springs. I moved what few possessions I had down there and started this job, right? And so that was like February. So I graduated in May, and it was February before I had a job. So that was probably okay, given we were in a slump, but still, it's kind of like, all right, I didn't like that. And it's not like I wasn't employed. I was working at Target. But
once you kind of graduate, I'm guessing there's that, I'm ready to hit the ground and
correct,
and I'm marketable, or I'm ready.
Right. I mean, we just spent all this time and money, of which my parents didn't have a lot of, right? And I'd worked part-time through college, and you actually want to use your degree, right? So, but it turned out okay. I mean, I spent almost 19 years at that company.
Oh, wow. So I guess it worked out okay.
Yeah. And I had just a tremendous experience there. I learned so much. I did a lot of different things. I mean, I started in an engineering design group. I worked with a regulatory group, because that's a regulated entity as well, except at the FERC, national FERC level as opposed to the state level like the utilities. There was somewhere in there was a big business model change where the FERC decided to deregulate part of that.
And what is FERC? I'm not familiar.
I'm sorry, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They are basically, they tell electric transmission and gas transmission what they can and can't do. Is probably and they say what their tariffs are and how much they can charge for their services and stuff like that.
As well as all the safety?
Mm-hmm. Well, the safety stuff goes through DOT, but you're assumed to be following all the safety stuff when you're dealing with FERC and these state entities. So, I did some work on once the FERC decided to sort of change the business model and deregulate part of it, I ended up on the unregulated side. So we had an unregulated piece of the pipeline all of a sudden, and it was really the buy cells, so the marketing buy cells and the contract management, and we eventually built a division within the broader corporation that did midstream and marketing buy cells, and we were making as much as the pipeline. And that was fun, building that division and making it successful within the broader corporation.
Can I ask, what's the logic or the driving factor just to have part of it deregulated and part of it regulated? Why would they do that? Well, obviously there was pressure that someone wanted this unregulated entity, but I don't understand what the value there is.
I think there was a period of time there that the FERC really wanted to try to deregulate as much as they could. And for a while, people were going to deregulate all the way to the household. So in some states started down that path. So there's a lot of stuff that went on from I'd say the 80s into the 90s. And even in the early 2000s, a lot of people were gonna deregulate all the way to the household, and you can buy your electricity from anybody.
So it has an element of competition.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So everybody was really intent on that. And then for people that are in the energy world, there were some things that happened in the California markets. And if you remember Enron imploding and
yes.
some stuff, okay, so all of that, that all brought it all to a halt. Everybody went, maybe this isn't a good idea.
Okay.
So, but they'd started to go down that path. And it was, the interesting thing about that is if you've got a company that you've had for 50 years and it's operated in this regulated environment, and then all of a sudden everybody changes the rules, I mean, you literally have to rebuild your business model.
Yeah.
Because what worked before doesn't necessarily work now, right? In sort of this new world. So
you got to be part of that rebuilding,
yeah,
which you said was really fun.
It was fascinating. It learned a ton. It was really a terrific experience.
And aren't you glad now you had that business degree?
Yes, by then I was. And by then I'd gone back and got a master's in finance. Because you got into it and you started going, I need to know more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were people more than willing to learn or teach you within the company, but I'm one of these people that I like to read and absorb and sort of get some fundamentals and then also learn hands-on application.
Yeah.
So
get the learning from an objective, credited university, not necessarily just all on the job and from.
Yep.
Okay.
And then I'd go down to the regulatory VP's office and say, hey, my prof said this last night. And he'd go, nope, that's wrong. And he'd stand up at the whiteboard and start saying, this is how it works in our world. Okay. So, I mean, it was a great experience.
But then you got to see two aspects of it, right? Which is this is how it works in our world, but maybe in the other world or other worlds, it works this way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, again, valuable to you. So you don't just know one world.
Yeah.
You knew the other worlds,
No,
too.
it was a great experience.
Yeah.
Just a great experience.
So were you in management leadership roles at this point, too?
I was. I actually got out of being an engineer and an individual performer pretty quickly. Within 2 or 3 years of starting, they had me in a supervisor role and then into a manager role. And so I got into the leadership side of this pretty early in my career and just never looked back.
Yeah. So what was it about you? I mean, did you kind of raise your hand and say you wanted to be a leader, or did they tap you, or?
I think it was more they tapped me. That same regulatory VP I was telling you about, I mean, he had to walk past my office to get coffee, and I have no clue what he saw in me, but he kind of adopted me at some point. And he'd go get coffee and he'd come back and he'd sit down in my office and he'd start talking to me. And, you're kind of freaked out about there's a vice president in my office. Why is he here talking to me, right? But apparently he saw something in me, right, that he thought would be of benefit in the company and in the leadership ranks. And the next thing I knew, I got promoted to supervisor. And then it just kind of went from there. And there were a couple of just incredible leaders at that company that at some point you kind of go, okay, I need to learn everything I can from these people. Yeah.
So great role models.
They were fantastic.
Well, and how many women? Again, you're in a male-dominated industry.
We had more at the corporate office. CIG was owned by a larger corporation named the Coastal Corporation, and they were headquartered in Houston. So Houston was very different than Colorado Springs. There were women in leadership roles in Colorado Springs, not so many in Houston, right? Oh. So when you went to Houston, it was a little bit different. There were a few, but it was a little bit different world in Houston, and much more sort of the traditional, what you would expect for the traditional energy and the sort of male-dominated and stuff like that. So we did have some women, but I would say that most of my early mentors and the people that I looked up to from a leadership aspect were men.
Were men. And as you navigated your career over these 19 years, were you raising your hand for promotions? Were you just getting promoted? Were you kind of picking, I'd like to be on this project? How did you navigate all of that?
Yeah, I was one of those people that would raise my hand and say, let me try that. I think I can figure it out. And once you kind of do that a couple times and people see that you are capable of figuring it out, then they tend to come and ask you more and say, hey, will you come and do this? Or would you jump on this team and help us do that?
Were these new endeavors or?
Sometimes they were new endeavors. Sometimes they were, hey, we need a new computer system. I mean, my boss told the guy I was working for at one point, we were trying to get a new computer system in. We were going from an old mainframe system to what is very common today. We called it a GUI system, but it was like what's on your PC. It's very user friendly, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my boss about it one day, and he goes, look, either you or I have to be the project manager on this, on the business side, and I'm not going to do it. I said, got it. I mean,
I just eliminated me, and I'm your boss, so now it's you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll volunteer, no problem,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, there were things like that would happen as well. But
you were volunteered. Yeah,
I was voluntold, right?
Yeah, voluntold.
But once you're in it, I mean, you get two choices, right?
Yeah.
You can be grumpy about it and grouse about it and say how unfair it is, or you can dig in and try to make it work, right? Yeah. And so I'm one of these, and this is probably the middle child thing again, optimistic, positive people, and I'm going to look for a way to make the best of it.
Well, at least, I mean, it's better to be, I think, part of change. I'd rather be at the table, part of the change, part of the decision making than on the outside,
That's right.
is having it thrust on you, and you're like,
That's
well,
right.
wait a minute, why did we do this? How did we get here?
That's
all
right.
that. So would you recommend that? Is that something that when you look back at your career that you might say, you know what, that was a good secret to my success, or a good part of your success?
Absolutely. Raise your hand.
Raise your hand, okay.
Jump
and don't
in.
wait to be picked sometimes.
Do not wait to be picked. You got to raise your hand, and you got to get in there. Because you'll learn a lot, right? And you'll always be expanding your skill set. And B, people will start noticing and paying it. Because you and I both know the next secret piece to this is having a sponsor at the executive level that's talking about what your capabilities are and saying good things about you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they're not going to do that if you're just going to go sit in your office and hide, or your cube and hide, and not say, let me help you solve that problem. Right? Because that's really what business is, a series of problems, right? Solving the problems so the business can move forward and be successful. That's what they're really interested in.
Yeah. I like that analogy. It's just it's a series of problems. It really is. And how do you keep solving them? Well, and you look at, sometimes in this is tended to be, I've heard, a female tendency. And I know I've kind of experienced it too, that I feel like, well, if I do my job, really, really well, I'll get noticed, and then I'll get promoted, and I'll get pulled into these things. But many times, if you're just doing your job all the time and not out doing some of the other jobs or other projects, that's where you've got to raise your hand and let people know I'm interested in doing more. Yeah. So I wanted to clarify that point, because sometimes people are like, well, I do volunteer, but wait a minute, I'm not in the circles to volunteer, or, maybe I haven't even got to that point to let people know.
And you've also got to be willing to volunteer when you don't really know how to do it. And I would say that
risk taker,
right? The first few that I did were more like, I got no clue how to do that, but I had enough confidence in myself that I can figure it out. And people by then knew enough about me that they were willing to, put me on the team. And then you just got to knock it out of the park. I mean, once you get that opportunity, you just got to knock it out of the park.
And how did you do that?
The first couple of years I was at CIG, I spent a lot of late hours working on it, right? Because you're learning, right? You're learning this model, you're trying to figure that out. And I can remember being at the office a lot of late nights trying to figure stuff out, and then, bugging people, asking questions, explain this to me, how does this work? I don't get how that interfaces with that, or how this thing I'm working on over here relates to this regulatory model over there. And that's something that I would really stress for people. If you do not really understand how your company makes money, you need to run towards that and figure it out. And I'm not saying, we make a product and we sell it. I mean, really understand how your company makes money and what the key factors are and how some of those decisions get made. Because it totally changes the way you look at a business and a lot of the decisions you make if you understand the levers and the pushes and pulls on how you make money.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing where it's pretty early on. It's like, all right, how does this regulatory model work? When is it important that this happens versus that happens? Stuff like that's really important to understand.
And then if it's a little bit outside of what you learned in college,
Right.
then that's even more confusing, right? So then you need to have that internal
Ask
mentor
questions.
that is kind of says, well, yeah, that's how the regular world runs. Here's the
Regulatory
regulatory
is
world.
different.
Yeah, it's different. And,
right.
yeah, or
Yeah.
utility
Right.
is different and all of
Right.
that, right? Wow. Okay.
You can't be afraid to ask questions. Because there's no such thing as a bad question.
There isn't. Usually people are actually known for asking like the most obvious question, which at the time some people might say that's a dumb question in their minds. They don't say it out loud. But then it ends up being such a powerful question.
That's right.
Like, well, and how are we going to make money at this?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so you're with CIG, then that's when you got to Excel, or kind of give us
Well,
the next...
at some point Coastal and El Paso merged in there. And El Paso was another pipeline company. And for people that have been through mergers, I mean, this was a pretty typical merger. We knew whose name was going to be on the building. Afterwards, it was not Coastal. So we knew how things were going to go.
Yeah. That you'll be taking direction from them.
Correct,
Mm-hmm.
correct. And that was fine. I mean, it's just the way. And you can be mad. It's the same thing. You can be mad about it, right? Or you can try to... You can leave, or you can figure out, right, whether or not it's going to work for you. So it took about a year for all of that kind of to come together. I built the transition plan to all the stuff, the unregulated stuff I was doing, ended up moving to Houston, and I built a transition plan for all that to happen. And they made me an offer to go to Houston, but I basically said, appreciate it, but no.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of other offers here to stay here in Colorado, and so I picked one of those. But that put me back on the regulated side and the pipeline side, and now in the regulatory department. So now you're in it, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with the FERC. So I did that for a few years after the merger, and they did offer me and they demoted everybody. So if you were a director, and I was a director when they merged, everybody got demoted to a manager. Okay.
So again, you can be mad, disappointed.
You can be mad,
or
right? And there were a
go
lot
with
of
the
people
flow.
that were mad
Mm-hmm.
about getting demoted, and of course they all said, hey, it's our scale's different, and this is equivalent, and yeah, right, whatever.
Yeah.
But they offered me a promotion back to director, but frankly, it was work I'd already done, so it's kind of like been there, done that, don't want to do it again, appreciate it. And they were shocked when I said, no, I didn't want to be back at a director level doing the same stuff that I had done before the merger had happened. So somewhere in there, a guy that I had worked with before basically made me an offer. It was really hard to refuse. And at that point in time, my stepkids were grown. Nobody was dependent on us anymore. And if ever there was a time to say, all right, maybe now's the time to take a chance, that was it. So I quit. And everybody was shocked. They're like, you can't quit. Well, actually, I can. But I quit, and I went with this very small, less than 20 employees, privately held firm that was doing computer work. Well, he built some computer stuff before and sold it for a bunch of money, and I thought, well, all right, let's go see what I can learn from him, and maybe lightning will strike twice in the same place. We got about a year into that, and it became really obvious that we weren't really that aligned on values and some. Even though I had tried to vet that out pretty carefully beforehand, once we got into it, it's like, all right, this isn't going to work. So we agreed to part company, and that was in the spring. And by the fall, I was working at Excel. I had found a position at Excel. Back in a director role, and I thought, all right, this will be fun, right, for a few years until I decide I don't want to work anymore. And but the problem is, once you get in a company like that, for people like me that are fixers and change agents, and I don't do well in a maintenance mode, right? I mean, I'm one of those people that's got to keep fixing stuff. You get in there and you start seeing, all right, this has got to be different. Well, this has got to be different. And so I started working on some of that stuff to the extent that I could, right, within the scope of the budget and the responsibilities that I had. Well, then, unfortunately, San Bruno happened in California. That horrific pipeline explosion, and people were killed, and it was just a really horrible thing. And Excel, basically, the guy that was the CEO at the time, he said, well, tell me again what we're doing, right, around this.
To make sure this doesn't happen to us, right?
And at the time, I was the Colorado VP for gas. And I said, well, here's what I've been working on, and here's what I'm doing. And he said, next month you're going to come and talk to the board. And I went, what? He says, next month you're going to come and talk to the board. And I said, okay. So, we put a presentation together, and I practiced it a bunch of times with him and others. And then I went and talked to the board.
And was this to get more funding for safety or for upgrades? Or
remember, a big part of boards are oversight,
mm-hmm.
and are you doing the right things to manage the risk and the company's reputation?
Okay.
Right? So this was a big deal, what was going on.
Yeah, so again, we don't want to have this
happen here. We don't kill people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not supposed to kill people when you are giving them products
mm-hmm.
and services, right? So they were very interested in what are we doing at Excel so that doesn't happen to us. And and I kept going, I'm just doing Colorado. I'm not doing the other states that we have assets in. Well, so anyway, it worked out just fine. They were very happy with the work we were doing. And that CEO retired. A new guy came in. The next thing I know, I get a phone call that says, will you be the gas business lead for the entire corporation? And what we've been doing in Colorado, we need to do more broadly. And so this is another one of those moments where you can go, crap, do I know how to do that? Or you can go, yeah, let me have it, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, you bet, give it to me, let's go. And I'd be the first one to tell you, did I know everything that I needed to know to take on a role like that? Absolutely not. That it was a big role in a big company at a corporate level. The next thing I know, I'm dealing with the general counsel on a regular basis. I'm talking to the board on a regular basis. You're talking with other senior vice presidents on a regular basis. Your boss has these expectations about your looking well down the road, and your plans extend longer than a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn and you grow, right?
Yeah.
And it took me about 2 meetings with the board before I said, I think I want to be on the other side of this conversation.
I want to be on the board side.
They were awesome. They
Yeah.
were absolutely awesome. I learned a lot from them. They asked great questions. They made you stop and think about what you're doing and how you were doing it. It's like, okay, I get it, right? And the next time I come talk to them, we were in a better place, and we just sort of walked our way through it. They were very supportive of what we were trying to do, and we achieved a lot. And it clearly wasn't just me. I mean, we totally changed our employee safety numbers, our public safety numbers, and our gas business was in a totally different place when I retired. Very supportive, and we just got to a much better place. Well, once you decide you might want to play with some board work, then you can't just be very myopic with your company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to get your name out there. You need to build some other skill sets. I started working nationally with the trade organizations, American Gas Association. I got on there's a advisory group that works with DOT that helps provide guidance on pipeline safety regulations. I got appointed to that and spent 4 or 5 years doing that. So, you're working with other people. I testified before a congressional subcommittee on pipeline safety. I never would have had an opportunity to do something like that, right? If you hadn't at some point said, yeah, I'll do that, right?
Yeah.
I'll raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the same way where the trade association said, hey, we need somebody that will go do this testimony. And I didn't even hesitate. I hit reply immediately and said, I'll do it.
Wow, just knowing the experience of it, you were going to learn and grow. Wow.
And by the time I actually went and did it, of course, it was, a scary experience,
mm-hmm.
right? But you have all these people supporting you. People are writing it for you, and then you're reviewing it and making sure you're comfortable with how it's said. They're practicing with you. They're giving you background on the people that are going to be in the room. They're in the room with you, right behind you, where they can whisper in your ear if they need to. So, I mean, you had a lot of support in doing that. And it wasn't near as terrifying as I thought it was going to be, but it's still, I mean, it's pretty weird.
Yeah. And
of course,
at the microphone, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or that one
and there's
table.
a clock right there too, because you have this much time, right? And you can't go over. So they have a countdown clock right in your line of sight. So
no
that
pressure.
part of it, no pressure. That part of it's a little intense, but you figure all that stuff out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can't argue it was a great experience overall.
Wow. Well, we're getting to the point where, can you believe it's been almost an hour
I can't.
already that we've been chatting. So this is just fascinating. I have so many more questions. I could keep going with you for at least another hour, but we do need to wrap up. When you look back at then all of these series of different roles and opportunities, what do you think was kind of the smartest thing that you did?
Being willing to get out of my comfort zone and being willing to try something and say, hey, let me take a swing at that. And then once you've volunteered, even if you don't have the right knowledge or experience, being humble enough to admit that and going and figuring that out, right? Who do I know that can help me understand this part of it? Well, what about this part? And going and getting that information and then integrating it into something that'll work.
So be willing to take on challenging roles, but also be willing to bring people with you, right? Or bring that information with you. So
ask for help when you need it. For one I know I'm not a detail person. I that's probably weird because I'm an engineer, but I know I'm not a detail person. So I always make sure I have people around me that are really good at that, so that I can make all these promises and then they can
they can deliver.
they know how to put the more detailed stuff together to make it happen. Yeah.
Well, is there anything that you'd like to share for someone maybe starting out or maybe starting over in a career that I haven't asked you? And some words of wisdom that you've...
I'm just going to keep going back to don't be afraid to take on something outside of your comfort zone. It feels really scary, but frankly, that's how we learn, right?
Yeah.
Is to get out of our comfort zone and be willing to take on stuff. I mean, I've had people, when I said I was going to get on the PG&E board, I've had kind of two groups of people. One of them is, are you out of your mind? They're in bankruptcy. They've got all these challenges. And that's been an interesting group of people that have said that to me. And then there's the other group that says, you go, girl, you're going to help them, fix the problems that they have. And because I have such a deep-seated belief that I can make positive change, and I like to fix things that are broken, I'm more aligned with that second group of, yes,
you go, I can make a difference.
Yeah, I know I can make a difference for this company.
You have enough data points in your career and in your life that that you don't know exactly what to do right now, but you can figure it out or have find the right people to help figure it out.
And what do people call that? EQ or emotional self-awareness, whatever. I mean, I know myself well enough that I know I can figure it out. I can learn what I don't know, and I can figure out how to help.
We might have to do another whole podcast just on that topic. But one thing I want to just kind of close with too is that nobody has the exact skills. So like when you said when your company was implementing a new computer system and your boss at the time said, well, either got to be me or you. I mean, you think about, sometimes when you're in a role and in a corporation, you're like, oh, well, I've never done that, so therefore I'm not going to raise my hand. Yet no one else has done it either. Correct. Or you would have already had a computer system, right? Correct. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, too, is to let people know that many times these projects, no one's ever done them before.
That's right.
So don't let that stop you. Really just, boldly step in. And now don't be arrogant and not ask questions or get the right people on your team. It's just humbly step in, but excitedly humbly step in, and you'll be amazed at what you can do.
That's exactly right.
And people will want to help you and be part of it, because then they'll be like, well, I've not done it either, so let's go do it together.
And in that scenario, my boss was very interested in us being successful.
Oh, yeah, he's going to support you, right? So you might have to come to and say, I need to offload this part because I'm over here doing this part.
And oh, by the way, I need somebody with this skill set, and I'd like that person. And I mean, he was incredibly supportive, making sure we had what we needed to make that. And we got it. We got it on time and on budget. And it wasn't trivial. It was a hard thing for the company to do and for our group to do, but we got there, and he was incredibly supportive. So,
wow.
Just ask.
Just ask. Ask and say yes.
Yes.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much. This has been an amazing journey on your life story. I hope you've enjoyed going back through it a bit.
I have. This has been fun. You've made me think about things I haven't thought about in a long time.
Very cool. And listeners, if you have any questions for me or for Cheryl, please post them on my website, lifestorycurator.com. And if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe, and you'll get then alerts and other interviews that come out. And we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, Cheryl.
Thank you.